This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. Usually, when we think of a global crisis, there is a distinct volume to it. A loudness, I guess you could say.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're neurologically wired to
Yes.
respond to loud, sudden threats.
Right, like if a financial market crashes, there are sirens, there's breaking news alerts on your phone, panic on trading floors, just endless push notifications.
Exactly. Or, if there's a natural disaster or a geopolitical conflict, it's visible, and it is incredibly loud. The amygdala processes that sudden change, like a loud noise or a sudden scarcity of food, and it triggers this immediate binary response.
It's either right in front of you demanding your attention or it isn't.
That's exactly.
But then you step into the world of modern demographics and you are confronted with a crisis that is completely silent.
Mm-hmm.
It is a quiet, just this creeping disappearance. And look, we aren't talking about some apocalyptic sci-fi movie where half the population just vanishes into thin air overnight.
Right. No Thanos snap here.
Yeah, exactly. We are talking about the real modern world right now. For you, the listener, living in this exact moment, the global fertility collapse.
It's staggering when you actually look at it.
It really is. When you strip away the noise and just look at the raw data, it's mind-blowing. Let's start with a baseline, just so we're all on the same page.
Sure.
To maintain a stable population, meaning just to keep a society exactly the size it is today without relying on immigration to fill the gaps, women need to have an average of 2.1 children.
Right. That is the replacement rate.
Okay, unpack that 2.1 for a
So
second.
it's basically 2 children to replace the 2 parents.
Yeah.
Right. And then that 0.1 is just there to account for, infant mortality and statistical variances.
Got it.
It is the absolute mathematical floor for demographic stability over any long period of time.
Okay, so keep that 2.1 threshold in mind.
Yeah.
Because Norway, which is, a country famously equipped with massive social safety nets, heavily subsidized childcare, tremendous wealth, they sit at 1.4.
Yeah.
And South Korea. South Korea has dropped to an unprecedented 0.7.
It's hard to even conceptualize what 0.7 means for a whole country.
Right. Let's just play that out mathematically. If South Korea's trend holds, and you take a generation of 100 people, and they only produce 33 children,
Mm-hmm.
in just 4 generations, their cohort size will shrink by 99%.
99%. I mean, it's the literal definition of a demographic cliff.
Yeah.
You are looking at a society that goes from 100 people in one generation down to 33, then to 11, then 4, and finally just a single person left to represent the descendants of that original 100.
Wow.
It is a complete mathematical inversion of the human story up to this point.
Which brings us to the core of our deep dive today. We are going on an intellectual detective story.
I love this one.
Yeah, we are looking at this groundbreaking paper. It's titled, Bridging a Reproductively Oriented Evolutionary Psychology and Interdisciplinary Perspectives to the Emerging Reproductive Crisis.
Quite a mouthful.
It really is, but the content is incredible. It was authored by a team of researchers, Larson, Fisher, Komatsu, and Kinnair.
And what makes this paper so fascinating, I think, is that it isn't just a dry recitation of statistics.
Right.
It is the story of researchers from completely different disciplines: demography, evolutionary biology, psychology. And they all realized that their individual fields were utterly failing to explain this quiet disappearance.
Their standard models were just breaking down entirely.
Exactly. So they had to embark on this massive interdisciplinary journey. They went through all these scientific dead ends, they dug into the deep past of human evolution, and ultimately they arrived at a truly radical vision of our reproductive future.
So to understand how Larson and his team cracked this case, we kind of have to understand where everyone else went wrong first.
Yeah, you have to look at the failures.
Right. We have to start with the first major scientific dead end, which is standard demography. For decades, demographers had this very comforting, highly logical explanation for why birth rates were dropping across the globe.
Oh yeah, they called it modernization theory.
Modernization theory. Break that down for us.
So modernization theory made perfect sense on paper, and largely because it relied on standard economic rationalism. The model was championed by economists like Gary Becker back in the mid-20th century.
Okay.
And it basically argued that as societies modernize, a very predictable sequence of events occurs. Women gain access to better education, they enter the formal workforce, contraception becomes widely and, cheaply available, and populations move from agrarian farms into dense urban centers.
Right. And so the economic calculus of having a child just fundamentally flips.
Exactly.
Like on a farm in 1850, a child is free labor.
Yeah, they're an asset.
But in a city in 1990, a child is a massive expense.
Precisely. Economists call this the opportunity cost of childbearing.
The opportunity cost.
Yeah, in a modern economy, the wages, the career advancement, the personal freedom you lose by stepping back to have and raise a child, those all go up exponentially.
It just makes less economic sense.
Therefore, rational economic actors choose to have fewer children. And for a long time, the data seemed to fit the theory beautifully.
The richer a country got, the fewer kids it had. Case closed, right?
Case closed.
But Larson and his team looked at the global data in recent years and realized modernization theory is actually a dead end.
It's completely incomplete.
Why is that? I mean, it sounds so logical.
Because the standard model completely fails the real-world stress test when you look outside a very narrow Western context.
Oh, okay.
It does not account for the universal timing, the persistence, and the incredibly rapid progression of this decline across entirely different cultural and economic landscapes.
So it's not just a Western phenomenon anymore.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The demographic collapse is no longer isolated to wealthy, secular Western democracies. We're seeing steep cliffs in deeply religious countries, in highly patriarchal cultures, in places with struggling economies, and places with booming economies.
Can you give an example?
Take sub-Saharan Africa, for instance. For a long time, it was the exception to the rule. People pointed to it and said, look, the theory holds.
Right.
But now, urbanized and educated populations across Africa are beginning to show these exact same sharp downward patterns.
So if it were just about female education and the opportunity cost of corporate careers, we wouldn't be seeing the same cliff in societies where female workforce participation hasn't radically changed.
Exactly. Or where the economic structures are vastly different.
Which led Larson's team to realize they were staring down the barrel of a massive scientific anomaly.
A huge one. Back in 1986, there was a researcher named Daniel Vining.
Okay.
And he identified this anomaly, and he called it the central theoretical problem of human sociobiology.
It is a mouthful of a phrase, but the concept is honestly mind-blowing when you really think about it.
Oh, totally.
Like, humans have outcompeted every other species on this planet. We sit at the absolute peak of our resource wealth. We have more food, more safety, more climate-controlled shelter, and fewer predators than at any point in the history of life on Earth.
We won the game.
We won. And suddenly, at the apex of our success, we decide to voluntarily reduce our reproductive fitness.
It directly contradicts the foundational premise of evolutionary biology. I mean, under standard Darwinian logic, any organism that secures abundant resources should intuitively convert those excess resources into offspring.
Right, that's just basic biology.
If you give a colony of bacteria unlimited sugar, they multiply until they fill the petri dish. If a deer population has a year of abundant vegetation and no wolves around, their population spikes.
Yeah, the analogy I like to use is it's as if a wildly successful tech startup spent 10 years fighting tooth and nail to capture 100% of the global market. They destroyed all their competitors, secured unlimited venture capital funding, built the most state-of-the-art factories the world has ever seen.
Everything is perfectly set up.
And then on the day of their absolute triumph, they just turn off the assembly line. They stop manufacturing their core product.
It makes zero biological sense.
Right. If humans are neurologically and biologically wired to pass on our genes, if that is the prime directive of evolution, how did we accidentally short-circuit our own hardware?
And to solve that paradox, Larson, Fisher, Komatsu, and Kenner realized they had to completely abandon standard demographic and economic models.
Because economics assumes we are rational calculators.
Yes. But evolution doesn't build rational calculators. It builds survival machines.
Wow, yeah.
They knew they had to look millions of years into the past to understand our evolutionary wiring. So they turned to a field specifically designed for this, which is evolutionary psychology.
Evolutionary psychology, or EP, the science of how our Pleistocene hunter-gatherer brains operate in the modern world.
Sounds perfect, right?
It sounds like the absolute perfect tool for the job. You'd think the evolutionary psychologists would have this figured out. But immediately, the researchers hit their second massive scientific roadblock.
Yeah, they hit a wall. Because they uncovered a massive glaring blind spot in the existing literature.
What was it?
Well, Evolutionary psychology is generally brilliant at explaining the mechanics of human mating. It can explain why, cross-culturally, we find certain physical traits attractive, how mate guarding and jealousy function, how status hierarchies dictate attraction.
Right, the stuff you read about in pop science books.
Exactly. But when Larson's team reviewed the mountains of data, they realized EP was almost entirely studying non-reproductive populations.
This part is so funny to me. I love how the researchers categorized this because they coined a brilliant acronym to describe the subjects usually studied in these university psychology experiments.
It's so plural.
So in traditional psychology, there's a known bias called weird, right? Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic.
Right, because most psych studies are just college sophomores
Yeah.
taking a survey for $20.
Exactly. But Larson's team updated it for mating psychology. They called the subjects strangely weird.
Let's break that acronym down because it really reveals the entire flaw in the research. So strangely weird stands for social media immersed,
Okay.
temporary relationships, relocatable, autonomy in mate choice, nulliparous.
Wait, pause on that one. Nulliparous. That's a medical term, right?
Yeah, it's a medical term meaning they have never given birth.
Unbelievable. Okay, keep going.
Then there's group segmentation, educational settings, lots of options, and young adults.
So just to be totally clear, we've based decades of foundational psychological literature on 20-year-old college undergraduates who are actively utilizing contraception to avoid the very thing we're trying to study.
That is exactly what we did.
We took people whose primary goal is to not have a baby and tried to extrapolate their mating habits to explain the global fertility crisis.
That is the big aha moment the researchers had. Studying how a 20-year-old student with a smartphone evaluates a casual date on Tinder tells us absolutely nothing about the psychological mechanisms a 32-year-old woman uses to choose an optimal, lifelong father for her children.
The parameters are completely different.
Completely.
Like at 20, you might be selecting for charm or physical symmetry or maybe just shared interests. But at 32, when the biological imperative of child-rearing really kicks in, you are suddenly evaluating stability.
Yeah, resource provisioning, emotional regulation.
From commitment, all of it.
The authors articulate this beautifully in the paper. They state that finding a perfect boyfriend at an early age in a temporary setting and finding a perfect father when one is actually ready to reproduce, those are completely different cognitive tasks.
They require totally different software.
Yes, they are performed in different contexts, and crucially, they are driven by differentially developed mental mechanisms. The science of evolutionary psychology had simply been looking at the wrong level of analysis for decades.
So, if demography failed because it assumed we were purely rational economic calculators,
Right.
and evolutionary psychology failed because it only studied college kids avoiding pregnancy,
Yep.
Larson's team had to zoom out even further. They needed a brand new framework.
And to find it, they had to step outside the mind for a second.
Okay, where did they go?
They stopped looking at our minds and looked at the actual physical environment we live in today versus the environment our bodies were built for. Which brings us to the first major piece of their puzzle, the evolutionary mismatch.
The evolutionary mismatch. So what does that look like in practice?
To understand the evolutionary mismatch, the authors pull in interdisciplinary research, heavily referencing the brilliant work of David Cummings on urbanization.
Ah, okay.
Cummings points out a profound, yet often completely overlooked, truth about the human animal. For 99% of our evolutionary history, which is roughly 2 million years, Homo sapiens and our hominid ancestors lived entirely outdoors.
I mean, that sounds obvious when you say it, but we forget it. We were nomadic hunter-gatherers.
Yeah, we lived on the African savanna, moving with the seasons, completely exposed to the sun, the wind, the natural elements.
And our biological systems, particularly our endocrine and reproductive systems, they didn't just passively exist in that environment, right?
No, they are physically hardwired to it.
Okay, let's look at that.
Let's look at photoperiods and circadian regulation. Our bodies produce melatonin in response to light and dark cycles. But it isn't just about sleep. In mammals, melatonin production directly interacts with the hypothalamus.
Let's trace this biological cascade because I think this is where the paper gets incredibly fascinating.
Oh, it's so cool.
So the sun goes down, the retina stops receiving bright light, and a signal goes into the brain.
Right, it goes to a tiny region called the suprachiasmatic nucleus.
The suprachiasmatic nucleus.
Yeah, and that acts as the body's master clock. This clock signals the pineal gland to release melatonin. But here's the critical reproductive link.
Okay.
Melatonin levels directly affect the secretion of a hormone called GnRH,
Which stands for?
gonadotropin-releasing hormone. And GnRH is the master switch for human reproductive function.
The master.
It controls the release of luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone, which basically drive ovulation in women and testosterone and sperm production in men.
So the reproductive system is literally tethered to the sun.
Precisely. In the ancestral environment, variations in sunlight signaled the seasons. It told the mammalian body when resources would be plentiful, like spring and summer, making it safe to reproduce.
Got it.
Now, think about the modern environment. Humanity has made a radical, incredibly sudden shift to living in indoor-centric, high-density, artificially lit urban boxes.
Urban boxes, yeah. We spend our days under fluorescent office lights that aren't nearly bright enough to mimic the ancestral midday sun.
Not even close.
And then our nights are spent staring at blue light, emitting screens that suppress melatonin long after the sun has actually gone down.
Right, so we have completely flattened the amplitude of our circadian rhythms.
And by flattening that light-dark amplitude, we disrupt the pulsatile release of that master switch, the GnRH.
We are 2 million-year-old hominids living in artificial sensory environments, and our endocrine systems are just receiving constant, chaotic signals.
Just totally confused.
Cummings and Larson argue that urbanization is humanity's most extreme departure from its ancestral habitat. It introduces unprecedented environmental inputs that directly interfere with our foundational hormonal biology.
Look, I have to admit, when I first read this part of the paper, I wanted to playfully push back.
Yeah, it sounds a bit wild.
Are these researchers essentially arguing that the global fertility crisis is happening because we all just need to go outside and touch some grass?
I mean, it sounds reductive when you phrase it exactly that way, but the physiological reality is undeniably there.
Right.
Like, touching grass and getting natural sunlight wouldn't hurt. But the authors are making a much more profound point.
Which is?
The lack of sunlight and the disruption of circadian rhythms creates a baseline of reproductive susceptibility. It subtly weakens the biological drive and reproductive function at a foundational cellular level.
It's like trying to run high-performance software on a computer where the power supply is just constantly fluctuating.
Perfect analogy.
The hardware is fundamentally compromised.
Exactly. And once that biological baseline is weakened by our physical environment, we become highly susceptible to the stressors of our modern socioeconomic environment.
Okay, so the physical mismatch of the urban world sets the stage for the psychological mismatch of the modern dating market.
Yes.
Which brings us back to our brains and how we actually go about finding a mate.
Right.
To understand why our mating psychology is misfiring so spectacularly, Larson and his team mapped out the history of Western mating. They looked at how the rules of engagement have changed over the centuries.
And they identified 3 distinct sexual revolutions that completely rewired how humans pair up.
This historical context is vital, I think, for the listener to understand because it shows how quickly we've deviated from our evolutionary programming.
It happened in the blink of an eye, evolutionarily speaking.
So if we go back to what they call the first sexual revolution, we're looking at roughly the year 1200 AD.
Yep, the Middle Ages.
Before this, Europe was largely organized around tribal kinship societies.
Extended families basically ruled everything. But the Catholic Church essentially dismantled these kinship networks.
How did they do that? I mean, how do you dismantle tribal societies across a whole continent?
Through a series of very strict decrees. The Church imposed lifelong monogamy. They strictly prohibited consanguinity, meaning you could no longer marry your cousins, which basically broke up the wealth and power of these large clans.
Right.
They banned polygyny, and crucially, they insisted on female consent for marriage.
So it wasn't just a property transaction anymore?
Well, it was still largely an era of arranged marriages for economic alliance, but this was the moment where individual mate preferences slowly started to actually matter. The couple had to at least agree to the union.
Okay, so that's the first revolution. Then we fast forward a few centuries and we hit the second sexual revolution around 1750.
Right, the Industrial Revolution kicks into high gear.
And the Industrial Revolution fundamentally changed human mobility.
Yes. For the first time, young people were leaving their ancestral villages in massive numbers. They moved to rapidly growing cities for wage labor.
And because they were earning their own wages and away from the watchful eyes of their extended families, they started demanding individual autonomy in mate choice.
They wanted to marry for love, or at least mutual attraction, rather than just securing an adjoining plot of land for their family.
Right, so premarital sex rates increased, courting rituals became more individualized, and the romantic ideal of finding your, soulmate began to take root in the cultural consciousness.
Exactly.
And then we hit the big one, the earthquake that changed absolutely everything, the third sexual revolution, circa 1968.
This is the era that truly severed our modern behavior from our evolutionary past.
What happened?
The late 1960s brought the introduction of the oral contraceptive pill, the widespread legalization of abortion, and a massive structural rise in female economic independence.
Women were entering higher education and the professional workforce in record numbers.
They no longer needed to marry a man simply to open a bank account or secure housing or survive economically.
Okay, so from 1200 to 1968, we gained incredible amounts of personal freedom and bodily autonomy.
Which is fantastic.
It's amazing. But what does this all mean for our caveman brains? How does evolutionary psychology process this sudden massive shift?
The researchers noted something incredible when they analyzed the third revolution through an evolutionary lens. The culture of the 1970s onward effectively returned humans to a mating adaptation that closely mirrors our deep Forager-era past.
Wait, returned us?
Yeah, specifically, it triggered a pattern of serial pair bonding interspersed with opportunistic short-term mating.
Okay, let me make sure I understand that. Serial pair bonding means dating someone exclusively for a few years, breaking up, having a period of casual flings or hookups, and then settling into another exclusive relationship.
Exactly.
Which, remarkably, is exactly how many hunter-gatherer societies operated. There was fluidity.
Yes. The modern dating scene actually looks a lot more like the Pleistocene savanna than the Victorian era did. The psychological behaviors of modern dating perfectly match our evolved software for mate seeking.
But there is a massive, critical difference.
A huge one. In the ancestral environment of the African savanna, that behavior of serial mating naturally and inevitably resulted in children.
Because there was no pill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Today, because of highly effective, widely available contraception, this evolved behavior no longer results in reproduction.
Think about it like a car transmission.
Oh, I like this.
For 2 million years, the engine of human sexual desire was directly connected to the drive shaft of reproduction.
Right.
Whenever the engine revved, the car moved forward, genetically speaking.
Yep.
The third sexual revolution basically gave us a clutch pedal. We can now rev the engine of sexual desire as high as we want, right? We can engage in serial pair bonding, short-term mating, hookup culture, while keeping the clutch depressed.
And the car never goes into gear.
The car never goes into gear. The engine sounds great, it's super loud, but we aren't moving anywhere.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The new societal arrangements perfectly match our evolved psychological tendencies for mate seeking. We love the thrill of the chase, the novelty of a new partner.
But they have created entirely novel challenges for actually establishing stable reproductive families.
We are satisfying the psychological urge without triggering the biological consequence.
And this realization leads us directly to the absolute breakthrough of Larson's paper.
This is the core of it.
By integrating this historical timeline with evolutionary psychology, the researchers developed a brand new concept to explain the dysfunction of the modern dating market. They call it young female syndrome.
To fully grasp young female syndrome, we first have to look at its counterpart, which is young male syndrome.
Okay.
Which is a concept evolutionary psychologists introduced back in 1985. Throughout human evolution, male reproductive success has been highly variable.
What does that mean exactly?
Basically, a few men at the top of the hierarchy historically had many children, while a huge number of men at the bottom had none.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because of this high-stakes environment, young men faced intense evolutionary pressure to acquire status, resources, and social dominance in order to attract a mate.
This explains a lot of traditional male behavior.
Yeah, it drove competitiveness, extreme risk-taking, the pursuit of wealth, and unfortunately, violence. It is the classic males competing aggressively for a female attention dynamic that you see across the animal kingdom.
The peacocks showing off their feathers.
Exactly. But Larson's team points out that today, the environment has shifted radically. Young women are now facing a completely novel developmental environment that no generation of women has ever faced in human history.
Because for the first time, women possess absolute mating autonomy combined with complete economic independence.
Right. And on top of that, technology has handed them a massive paradox of choice.
The dating apps.
Yes. For millions of years, a woman's dating pool was limited to the 50 or 100 people in her nomadic tribe, or, later the few hundred people in her village.
Yeah.
Today, a woman opens Tinder, Bumble, or Hinge, and she literally has thousands of options in her pocket. She can scroll through an endless catalog of potential mates.
And in this historically unprecedented environment of hyperabundant choice, what did the researchers find?
They found that women's short-term attraction mechanisms, when exposed to infinite choice, become hyper-discriminatory. The data from dating apps shows that women reject roughly 95% of the men they see on these platforms.
95%. That is a staggering bottleneck.
It really is.
And I think we have to tread very carefully here for the listener's sake, because we are wading into what the researchers call the female choice fertility paradox.
Right.
It is so easy to let modern gender politics cloud this discussion, so I want to make it absolutely clear that we are looking at this purely through the impartial, evolutionary, and sociological lens of the researchers.
Yeah, we are absolutely not taking sides here.
We are just exploring how our 2 million-year-old hardware is reacting to modern software.
That's it. That is a crucial distinction. The authors are not making moral judgments at all. They are observing biological and sociological mechanisms at work.
Right.
Across all cultures and throughout history, women naturally exhibit a trait called hypergamy. They pursue higher-value men for both short and long-term mating.
And this isn't superficial, right?
No, not at all. It is a deep evolutionary feature designed to ensure the best possible genetics and resource provisioning for highly vulnerable offspring.
But if a woman's baseline for what constitutes resources or value is calibrated to her own status, modern female economic independence fundamentally shifts the math.
It shifts it dramatically. If a woman in 1950 wasn't allowed to have her own career, a man with a steady factory job represented a significant increase in her security.
Yeah.
But today, a woman can earn her own advanced degree, buy her own house, and provide fully for herself.
So, if a woman is making $100,000 a year, her biological hardware might demand a partner who makes $150,000 for him to even register neurologically as a provider.
Exactly.
But mathematically, the pool of men making that much is incredibly small. The biological threshold for a man to be considered father material has skyrocketed past the reality of the median male.
That is the paradox. Because women no longer strictly need men for economic survival, their standards for a long-term reproductive partner have understandably and honestly rationally risen.
Right.
But the mathematical reality of this shift ends up excluding a rapidly growing share of the male population. You have a large population of highly successful independent women competing fiercely for a very small top tier of men who meet these new elevated criteria.
And think about the behavioral incentives for that top tier of men.
Oh yeah, it changes their behavior entirely.
Because those top tier men now have access to a vast pool of willing, highly desirable female partners for short-term mating, facilitated by dating apps and completely decoupled from the risk of pregnancy because of contraception.
Right.
So those men are heavily disincentivized to settle down into long-term pair bonds. Why commit at 25 when you have endless options?
The result is a profound misalignment in the mating market. You have women delaying childbearing, waiting longer to find a suitable, high-value partner who's actually willing to commit.
Right.
And you have top-tier men delaying commitment because the short-term mating environment is so favorable to them.
Which leads the researchers to a very dark, incredibly sobering conclusion regarding modern demographics. They identified an exceptionally strong cross-national correlation between gender equality and lower fertility.
The correlation coefficient they found is R equals 0.81.
Wow. In the social sciences, a correlation coefficient of 0.81 is staggeringly high.
It's massive. It suggests a deeply entrenched, almost inescapable systemic link.
So the more equal, free, and economically empowered a society becomes, the fewer children it produces.
Yeah.
That is a brutal paradox. We built a more just world, but in doing so, we accidentally built a world that fails to reproduce itself.
The researchers formalized this dynamic into a concept they call the post-pair bonding fertility trap.
Post-pair bonding fertility trap.
Yes, it is a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle. It begins with pair bonding rates dropping, driven by that paradox of choice and the mismatched expectations we just unpacked.
Because men and women aren't forming stable long-term pair bonds, fertility rates plummet.
But here is the secondary devastating effect. This drop in pair bonding leads to massive male marginalization.
Let's follow that thread. How exactly does a drop in marriage rates lead to a societal-level marginalization of men?
Think back to the evolutionary incentive structure for men that we discussed earlier, young male syndrome. Historically, Why did men seek status, endure grueling education, or take on dangerous, difficult jobs? While there are obviously many individual motivations, on a biological, population-wide level, men pursued resources primarily to attract a mate, form a family, and ensure the survival of their genetic line.
The provider instinct was the fuel in the engine.
Yes. But today, because of the hyper-discriminatory nature of the modern mating market, a large percentage of average men are effectively locked out.
Right, they fall into that 95% rejection rate on the apps.
Exactly. They're increasingly deprived of intimacy, romantic love, and the realistic prospect of fatherhood.
And when you remove the ultimate evolutionary reward, which is a family, from the equation, what happens to the motivation?
The researchers argue that many of these marginalized men suffer what they term a motivational collapse.
Motivational collapse.
If the biological reward seems mathematically unattainable, why grind at a difficult, unfulfilling job? Why take on massive debt to pursue higher education? Evolutionarily speaking, the juice is no longer worth the squeeze. So these men begin to withdraw. They fall behind in university enrollment. They drop out of the formal workforce at alarming rates. They retreat into digital sanctuaries like video games, internet subcultures, virtual reality.
And here is where the trap snaps shut. Because these men fall behind in education and employment, they lose whatever remaining status they had.
Yeah.
Which means they become even less attractive to women, which pushes the pair bonding rates even lower, which further collapses the fertility rate.
It is a demographic death spiral.
That is terrifying.
It is a devastating feedback loop, and it highlights a core evolutionary truth raised by the authors, one that is often really difficult for modern people to accept.
What's that?
Our emotions do not work for us. They work for our genes.
That is a haunting phrase. Our emotions don't work for us.
We consciously think we seek sex or romantic love or social status because those things make us happy. We view them as ultimate goals.
Right, that's the whole point of life, we think.
But evolutionarily, happiness is totally irrelevant. Those emotions are just proximate mechanisms.
Right.
They're the neurological carrots evolution uses to get us to do the work.
Right, to pull the cart.
And for 2 million years, chasing those feelings reliably led to babies.
But modernity broke the chain.
Exactly. Modernity, through effective contraception and radical economic shifts, completely severed the link between the thrill of sex or the comfort of a relationship and the ultimate evolutionary test of reproduction.
Our brains just haven't updated.
No. So we are left blindly chasing the proximate thrills, swiping endlessly on apps for a dopamine hit, seeking casual validation while completely failing the ultimate biological mandate. We hacked the system to get the reward without doing the work, and now the system is collapsing.
That is incredibly sobering. But we can't lay this entire crisis solely at the feet of dating apps and psychological mismatch, right?
No, not entirely.
Because this psychological software bug is colliding violently with real-world physical hardware crises. The external environment is actively hostile to family formation.
Very much so.
Which brings us to the amplifiers of the crisis. I want to look closely at the data from Benjamin Couillard on the housing market, because this takes the evolutionary theory and grounds it in cold, hard economics.
This is where the interdisciplinary nature of the deep dive really shines, I think. Couillard built a highly sophisticated structural model to analyze the dynamic, joint choices people make regarding housing and fertility in the United States.
Okay.
And his findings are an absolute gut punch to anyone trying to understand why millennials and Gen Z aren't having kids. He found that if housing rents had simply remained stable since 1990 rather than skyrocketing, the U.S. would have had 13 million more children born over the last 3 decades.
13 million.
Yeah.
That isn't a rounding error. That is an 11% increase in births, just erased from existence because the rent is too damn high.
And Couillard's model goes much deeper than just housing is expensive. He demonstrates that the type of housing available matters immensely. In North America, there is a strong cultural and psychological norm that dictates a certain standard of living for children. Specifically, the norm dictates that parents need a dedicated bedroom for their children.
Right. The days of a family of 6 sharing a one-room tenement are over. Modern parents feel a profound obligation to provide space.
Exactly. But as urban centers grow and housing costs rise, developers prioritize density and profit margins. They build small units.
Like studios and one-bedrooms.
Yes. Consequently, the relative price of a family-size home, like a 3- or 4-bedroom unit, skyrockets exponentially compared to a 1-bedroom apartment.
This triggers what economists call the quantity-quality trade-off, right?
Yes.
If you want to give your child a high quality of life, which requires a 3-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools, but that apartment costs a fortune, you are forced to reduce the quantity of children.
You have 1 kid instead of 2. Or you delay so long you end up having 0.
Couillard actually ran the math on government interventions, didn't he?
He did. He calculated that if a government wants to implement policies to boost fertility, subsidizing large units, meaning homes with 3 or more bedrooms, yields 2.3 times more births than subsidizing small 1-bedroom units.
Wait, think about the policy implications of that.
They're massive.
For the last decade, urban planners and, YMBY, yes. In my backyard, advocates have been fighting to build dense 1-bedroom micro-apartments in city centers to alleviate the housing crisis.
Right.
Are you saying those specific policies might actually be suppressing the birth rate?
According to Couillard's structural model, yes, that is the unintended consequence. Building an abundance of small, affordable 1-bedroom units is fantastic for helping young adults move out of their parents' houses, which boosts independence.
Sure.
But it effectively incentivizes and entrenches singlehood or childless coupledom over family formation. It traps young people in spaces where biological reproduction feels physically impossible.
It's like a soft cage.
Exactly. Couillard calculated the grim reality of the current market. The return on investment for subsidizing family-friendly housing is 1 additional birth per $160,000 of government subsidy.
$160,000 just to get 1 extra citizen born.
Yeah.
That shows you the sheer magnitude of the economic headwind we are facing.
It's enormous.
But it's not just the physical constraint of rent. There is a psychological heaviness, right? A pervasive dread hanging over the younger generations.
Oh, absolutely.
The paper by Puglisi, Mutarak, and Vignoli explores how what they call the meta-crisis is affecting fertility, specifically looking at Italy, which is a country currently experiencing one of the lowest birth rates on the planet.
Yeah, Puglisi and her team studied how macro-level uncertainty, specifically regarding environmental degradation, climate change, and global instability, how all of that paralyzes the micro-level rational calculations people make about their personal futures.
Yes, and they coined a haunting phrase for it, didn't they?
Yes, the shadow of the future.
There is a quote from their source material that really struck me. They interviewed a 28-year-old woman named Claire Zakowski.
I remember this.
When they asked her what it would actually take for her to feel comfortable bringing a child into this world, she didn't say cheaper childcare or a bigger house. She said, quote, "I feel like there'd have to be a moral awakening from everyone."
It is a profound, almost spiritual statement of despair.
It really is.
It perfectly encapsulates the feeling that the foundational systems of our global paradigm, like the demands for endless economic growth, rampant materialism, environmental destruction, that they are inherently unstable and nearing a breaking point.
But I have to push back here. I really want to play devil's advocate, looking through the lens of human history.
Go for it.
Come on. Human ancestors reproduced through the ice ages.
True.
They had babies during the Black Plague, when a third of Europe was dying. They had children during the World Wars, while bombs were literally dropping on their cities and rationing was in full effect.
Right.
Why does climate anxiety or high rent suddenly shut down a primal biological drive that survived the bubonic plague?
It is a brilliant question, and it is the exact question evolutionary biologists have to answer. The explanation goes back to a deep subconscious mechanism called threat calibration.
Threat calibration. Walk me through how that works.
When human populations faced plagues, famines, or brutal wars, the mortality rate, specifically infant and adult mortality, was extremely high.
Obviously, yeah.
The evolutionary response to an environment with high immediate mortality is actually to increase reproduction.
Wait, really? Increase it?
Yes. It triggers what biologists call a fast life history strategy. You have 6 or 7 kids, investing less energy into each individual one, simply hoping that 2 of them survive the plague to reach reproductive age. It is a biological numbers game.
Okay, that makes sense. High immediate threat equals spray and pray, genetically speaking.
Exactly. But modern climate anxiety, microplastics, economic precarity, and social isolation do not signal immediate sudden mortality. You aren't going to drop dead tomorrow from climate change.
Right, it's not a bomb falling on your house.
Instead, these factors signal a prolonged, grinding lack of resources and deep environmental instability over the long term.
Think of it like a modern car engine.
Oh, another car analogy. I love it.
If you crash a car, the airbags deploy. That's an immediate response to sudden trauma.
Right.
But if the car's computer detects that the oil pressure is slightly too low over a long period of time, it doesn't deploy the airbags. It puts the engine into limp mode.
Yes.
It cuts power to protect the system from catastrophic failure.
That is a perfect analogy. Our bodies and brains are subconsciously running a continuous background calculation. And right now, the sensors are determining that the modern environment is simply too hostile, too socially fragmented, and too under-resourced to successfully rear a highly dependent, incredibly expensive human infant that requires 2 decades of continuous, intense investment.
So it's not just a conscious intellectual anxiety where a millennial sits down and thinks, well, I'm worried about carbon emissions, so I will abstain from procreation.
No, it's way deeper than that.
It's our deep biological hardware receiving environmental signals like isolation, expensive housing, chaotic news cycles, and running a calculation. Resources are scarce, the tribe is fragmented, the future is unstable. Abort the reproductive mission. Go into limp mode.
Precisely. It is a systemic biological shutdown in response to perceived long-term scarcity in social decay, not a panic response to immediate physical danger. We are highly evolved creatures correctly reading a deeply flawed environment.
Okay, let's take a breath and look at the map of where we are. We've charted the demographic dead ends of modernization theory.
Yep.
We've uncovered the evolutionary mismatch of being 2-million-year-old apes trapped in artificial indoor blue-lit boxes that confuse our endocrine systems. We've tracked how the 3 sexual revolutions broke the ancient link between the act of sex and the consequence of babies.
Right.
We've seen how dating apps created the female choice paradox, bottlenecking the mating market and leaving a massive chunk of men marginalized, demotivated, and dropping out of society.
It's a lot.
And we've seen how skyrocketing rents for family homes and the psychological shadow of the climate meta-crisis push our threat calibration systems into a full reproductive limp mode.
It is a perfect storm of biological, psychological, and economic factors, which brings Larson, Fisher, Komatsu, and Kinnair to their final and undoubtedly their most provocative conclusion in the paper.
What's that?
After meticulously analyzing all of this interconnected data, they state something that most policymakers refuse to admit. We likely cannot fix the pair bonding crisis.
Wow.
The traditional nuclear family, as a mass societal norm, might be permanently broken.
Wait, they're saying we can't fix it? What about all the government programs trying to reverse this?
Standard pronatalist policies, bribing couples to have kids with tax breaks, baby bonuses, subsidized daycare, they aren't working.
They aren't.
We have data from Scandinavia, from East Asia, from Eastern Europe. Despite billions of dollars spent, these policies have not successfully reversed the downward trend anywhere. The psychological shifts brought on by female independence, the paradox of choice, and the evolutionary mismatch are simply too profound to be reversed by a $500 monthly tax credit.
So if we can't go backward to the traditional model, where do we go?
The researchers suggest that if advanced societies want to survive the demographic cliff, they must pivot rapidly toward a new paradigm they call individualistic reproduction.
Let's unpack that. Individualistic reproduction.
Yeah.
If women's standards for a partner have risen, and they are mathematically refusing to settle for the available men, but surveys show that the vast majority of women still possess a strong biological desire to have a baby. Mathematically, the only remaining option is to have the baby without the partner.
Exactly.
Is the paper suggesting that society steps in to replace the economic function of the father?
That is exactly what they are suggesting. If women want children but cannot find a good enough partner in the modern dating market, society must provide the massive structural, economic, and social resources necessary for them to raise children alone.
So we're talking about a radical restructuring of the social safety net.
Completely.
Extremely generous government transfers specifically to solo parents, fully subsidized, 24/7 childcare facilities, state-sponsored co-housing arrangements where single mothers can pool resources. We are talking about the state acting as the surrogate provider.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because women are increasingly choosing childlessness over partnering with a man they deem suboptimal. The evolutionary drive for a high-value mate is stronger than the drive to reproduce at any cost.
Right.
If nations want to avoid the 99% cohort collapse we talked about at the beginning, they have to empower women to reproduce completely outside of the traditional pair bond.
But hold on, let's think about the secondary effects of that.
Okay.
If we do that, if we completely institutionalize and subsidize solo motherhood as the new demographic norm, doesn't that just pour gasoline on the fire of male marginalization?
It's a huge concern, yeah.
If average men are already suffering a motivational collapse because they are locked out of family life, making them entirely economically and socially obsolete to the reproductive process seems like a recipe for a massive catastrophic societal crisis. You'd have a massive underclass of young men with absolutely no stake in the future of the society.
The authors do not shy away from this grim reality. They explicitly acknowledge that transitioning to individualistic reproduction would heavily exacerbate male marginalization in the short and medium term.
I mean, how could it not?
It is a triage strategy for population collapse, not a utopian solution for gender relations. But they forecast that the human journey doesn't end there. The evolution of our species is ongoing.
Okay, so where does it lead?
They point to a looming horizon, what they call the fourth sexual revolution, which they estimate could begin to take serious shape around the year 2040.
2040. That is less than 2 decades away. What does a fourth sexual revolution even look like?
It is heavily driven by radical technological advancement. In the early stages, it might include hyper-advanced AI-driven mate matching.
Like an algorithm that actually works.
Exactly. Instead of endlessly swiping on superficial traits, AI could bypass the paradox of choice by analyzing our deep psychological and biological compatibility, essentially acting as an omniscient matchmaker.
But the paper goes further than just better dating apps, doesn't it?
Much further. The true hallmark of the fourth revolution involves ectogenesis.
Ectogenesis, meaning?
It's the development of viable artificial wombs.
Oh.
Combined with widespread CRISPR gene editing, advanced robotic caretakers or nannies, and the potential for sustainable resource abundance driven by artificial general intelligence, the entire biological bottleneck of reproduction changes.
It is like reading a hard sci-fi novel that is rapidly becoming reality.
It really is.
We are essentially talking about outsourcing the massive biological and energetic burden of continuing the human species to technology.
And crucially, this technological leap could eventually offer men reproductive equality.
Oh, wait.
Throughout mammalian history, females have held a biological monopoly on gestation. If artificial wombs become viable, safe, and accessible, men would no longer be strictly dependent on a female partner to have biological children.
They could just incubate their own child.
Yes. They could pursue individualistic reproduction just as women might under the new paradigm.
So to save the human race from the silent collapse, we might have to completely physically decouple reproduction from the human body and the traditional family unit.
It is a radical, almost disorienting destination. But when you follow the strict evolutionary logic of how our ancient hardware interacts with the uniquely modern technological environment we've built, it is exactly where the data points.
This has been an absolute intellectual marathon.
Definitely.
Let's retrace our steps for you, the listener, before we wrap up. We started by looking at the quiet disappearance, falling birth rates, and realized that the standard demographic theories of modernization and the psychological studies of strangely weird college students were completely failing to explain the crisis.
We then uncovered the deep physiological mismatch. We saw how moving our 2-million-year-old hominid bodies into artificially lit urban boxes disrupted the melatonin and GnRH cascades, weakening our foundational reproductive biology.
Right, and from there, we tracked how the 3 sexual revolutions gave us incredible personal freedom, but accidentally activated a post-pair bonding trap. We saw how women's evolutionary drive for high-value mates, when placed in a modern world of endless dating app choices and female economic independence, bottlenecked the mating market and left a massive portion of men marginalized and demotivated.
We layered on the economic reality, seeing how skyrocketing rents for family homes and the psychological shadow of the climate medic crisis push our threat calibration systems into a full reproductive limp mode.
And finally, we stared down the barrel of a 4th sexual revolution where individualistic reproduction, artificial wombs, and AI might be our only demographic parachute.
It's quite a journey.
Which leaves us with a deeply profound question to consider. For you, listening at home, this is a question that the data forces us to confront. If the 4th sexual revolution fully decouples reproduction from romance, if in 2050 babies are gestated in artificial wombs, funded by the state, and raised in co-housing units with the help of AI, How will the fundamental concept of human love evolve?
It is the ultimate philosophical question. For millions of years, romantic love, jealousy, heartbreak, and pair bonding were not just poems or songs. They were the vital neurological glue that kept two unpredictable humans together just long enough to ensure the survival of a highly vulnerable infant. Love was an evolutionary survival mechanism.
So if technology completely removes that survival requirement, if you no longer need a partner to have a child and ensure its survival, will we finally separate the pursuit of romantic happiness from the heavy biological burden of the human species?
Will love become purely recreational, just a beautiful but biologically unnecessary game?
Or will it mutate into something entirely new, something our caveman brains can't even begin to recognize today? A silent disappearance indeed. From a primal evolutionary survival mechanism to whatever comes next. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We will see you next time.
Heliox is produced by Michelle Bruecker and Scott Bleackley. It features reviews of emerging research and ideas from leading thinkers, curated under their creative direction with AI assistance for voice, imagery, and composition. Systemic voices and illustrative images of people are representative tools, not depictions of specific individuals. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other episodes, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.